copy. Okay, wonderful. So welcome everybody. I'm going to share the screen so we can see the slide deck. And I can hopefully see everybody on my other screen. Okay, so everybody should be able to see the slides. Let me know if you can't see them or if you can't hear us at all. But good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, depending where in the world you have joined us from today. And welcome to, first of all, the RDA's 22nd plenary meeting. This is the first set of breakout sessions that we have. And welcome to the Mapping the Landscape of Digital Research Tools working meeting. So this is actually possibly our final official meeting, as the group are preparing now their draft deliverables for submission for community review. Just to introduce myself, my name's Connie Clare. I am the Community Development Manager at the Research Data Alliance Foundation, but I'm also privileged to be facilitating this group that is working on creating some kind of visual map of digital research tools, and hopefully we can share the 3 deliverables that have been drafted so far with you for your feedback during this session. So the aim really over the next 2 weeks of the plenary, we have the session this morning, and then we have a repeat session again next week on Tuesday. And we'd like to showcase the work that's been done so far and see if we are missing anything, or how we can really take this forward, possibly even after this working group is complete. So a few logistics before we begin. I've shared a few links in the chat and Adam will continue to do so. So you will have access to the presentation slides. You'll be able to access the deliverables as well from there. There's also the link to the working group page and our collaborative notes for today's session. So please, if you haven't done so, can you sign in on page 1? It's really good to know who is with us today and to learn a bit more about you as participants. And if you scroll down through the collaborative notes, you will see there are various sections for you to ask questions or take notes. You can also post questions in the chat, and we do have some time for an interactive Q&A and also a general discussion towards the end of the session. And during that time, you can raise your hand, you can unmute, and you can use the chat and the collaborative notes. And I just want to emphasize that this is a Research Data Alliance plenary session, so we will be adhering to the RDA's guiding principles and code of conduct. Hopefully nobody in this session needs to report a breach, but if for whatever reason you feel like you need to, we do have instructions within the collaborative notes for that. I also would like to mention, you're probably well aware that the RDA is transitioning to a new web platform at the moment. So we do have a new homepage. Please have a look at that. I've also linked our shared Google folder. And if you're an existing RDA member and you haven't yet been to the new web platform, there is actually a link from the slides on how you can reactivate your account. We are encouraging members to do so. And I would like to mention that this group will no longer be using the mailing lists. So all groups actually won't be using mailing lists, but using the group post feature. So you'll see a tab which I've highlighted here in red. So we're encouraging everybody to do that as well. That's just a tangential announcement for you all. I would like to just introduce the co-chairs. So I don't know if we have Francis with us today in this meeting, but we have Francis Crawley. We also have here Lim Ree, and we also have Rory McNeil, who is with us on the call and presenting today, and also Adam Viles-Moore, who'll be presenting as well about the deliverables. And I'd also just like to give a shout out to one of our very active members who's been working with us on deliverables, and that is Marcelo Garcia. So Marcelo will be presenting a bit more shortly too. I won't talk in depth about this because you can read about it if you'd like to, but this group is actually supported by Oracle for Research through the RDA's public-private partnership model. So the idea here is that Oracle supported this 2 working groups, actually, this one and another one on multiomics, for a period of 12 months, so from January last year to January this year. And it is part of the RDA strategic plan going forward to collaborate with industry and the private sector. And this allows us to provide in the Secretariat professional and timely facilitation to support you as global volunteers and to help accelerate data-driven developments. So the session agenda, I'm going to hand over very shortly to Marcelo, who will give an introduction to the working group, a bit about the background, the description and the high-level aims and objectives. And then Adam and Rory, between them, will take some time to present through the 3 draft deliverables that we've been working on. And then we'll have 20 minutes for an open Q&A. And then Rory will share some proposed next steps, because as I mentioned, the group has developed a prototype that we hope that we can work on through another type of mechanism, another working group within the RDA. And then we'll hopefully have time for some in-depth discussion on your thoughts. So on that note, I'll stop speaking and I will hand over to Marcelo. Thanks, Marcelo.
Hi, thanks, Connie, for nice introduction. Well, so I will be presenting here our background and description. So I think the biggest problem we have is that each project produces some amount of data, and this data is not exactly between the projects. So, and the idea is that this data will kind of overleave the project. So how do you leave your data ready for the next project, or how do you store? The problem is that each project is different. Or if you are doing a medical research or a new processor, so this leads to different models, different ways of sharing. And this creates a lot of tools. Each person more or less reinvent the wheel, and we have a lot of tools that don't talk to each other. So this produces overwhelming. So if you go out and try to say, how do I do this? Probably you feel overwhelmed by the amount of options that are available. So one of our ideas was to categorize these tools and functionality and interoperable. So can one tool talk to the other? So we have a kind of life cycle or flow. And well, if you don't have this, then you have this silo. So every time you have to reinvent the wheel or reinvent the scripts and some kind of automation. So that was the idea of this part. So next. So our aim is to provide an overview of this. So as I said, each project, each style of research produces amount of data and has its own life cycle. So our deliverables was to create a unified view. So we try to evaluate what are the life cycles available at the moment. Spoilers alert, we found 26. Then we try to identify all the common stages of all of them. And this was the characterization schema. And with that, we create a plan answer. Yes, so once we identify all the steps, all the common stages, we create one unified, and the third will be a part that automatic to help you identify these tools. Okay, thanks. Okay, so this is our map. So we start in October with this review of the life cycles available. Then we categorize it. I think we create a unified view. Now that's the map part. This tool called Maldred, an interesting name, difficult to spell. And then I think most of the part was then doing this map. And then now Adam is working on this visualization or working. And I would say now we are finally in this finalization process where we're going to deliver the 3 process. That's it.
Thanks, Marcelo.
All right.
Over to Adam.
Ah, yes, this is me. Hello, everyone. Okay, so in a bit more depth after that great overview from Marcelo, the next bit is I'm going to talk about what we've been working on first of all, and then I'm going to hand over to Rory to talk about the kind of second stage, and then I'm going to come back in and share the kind of progress on the visualization, curation, kind of affordancy bit. So first step in quite a lot of these projects is to set up a Google spreadsheet, right? So what we did was we looked for different kinds of life cycles dealing with research data, pulled together some information on them, and tried to figure out, kind of like representative life cycles across the different kind of means and ways of dealing with it. We also then looked at, how well they were characterized, how well they were supported, and next slide, Chris Whitty. Then we did this amazing process, which I have visualized using Mermaid. So what we've got here is a kind of a qualitative analysis step. So we took these 26 and we went, what are the kind of top 5? So these top 5 we identified, and then we went through a harmonization process. And after the harmonization process, we came up with a thing which is the Maldorth RDL, Research Data Lifecycle. Lovely pointing, thank you, Connie. This is kind of like a harmonization of the most prominent features of the 5 most characterized, most well-described research data lifecycles that we identified from the 26. So moving on. Thank you. The 5 research data lifecycles RDL models that we chose were from Elixir, NIST, DCC, EMBL, and UCL. You'll see that we've got a rationale for each of those, which I'll leave you to read in the slides in your own time. And then did a kind of sparse and dimensional mapping of those 5 life cycles and their characteristics. And so if we move on, there we go. We came together with this thing that's on the outside. So that's Maldorth. And what you'll see in the concentric rings inside are those 5 other RDLs, and how they map against each of the stages of Maldorth. So this is the first version of this that we put together before we moved on to stage 2. And you'll see when we come on to talk about the actual kind of final version later, you'll notice there's a couple of things going on. One thing that we moved kind of fund out of the lifecycle to its own separate loop. And the way that these things are related together is just a little bit of tweak difference. But that was, again, this thing kind of evolves, right? Because as you come to use something, you notice various things about the characterization and so on. So if we just move on, thank you. Rory's going to take over in a second to talk about this. Just on the final point on the Maldorth lifecycle, the thing that we wanted to make sure that we did in order to do a harmonized version instead of choosing one of those 5 was that allows us to, whenever we, for example, come across other disciplines, and when we talk about moving on to the next stage, we can incorporate that into Maldorth and we can build the crosswalks back to it. So that means that gives us a wider applicability and more kind of sustainability moving forwards. Rory.
Okay, well, hi, thank you, Adam, and hi, everyone. So, Adam, I thought that was very very good. I don't think I'll live up to your high standards there. I'm just joking. Well, I'm not joking. I won't. But I think you gave a real flavor for the process. So you showed at the beginning what the output was in terms of what we came up with. But I think as you can see, as everyone can see from Adam's description, it wasn't as if we just parachuted in and selected that or created it. It was actually a fairly quite involved and messy process to come up with it, which gives it some, which isn't to say that it's perfect, but I think it gives some rationale and justification for what we came up with. Okay, so that was the first deliverable, and I'm going to talk about the second deliverable, which is the categorization schema of the digital research tool. So as you can see from Adam's introduction, we at that point we had a harmonized research lifecycle, and critically, for each stage we had a name for that stage: plan, conceptualize, etc. So the task, there was actually, again, I'll try to give you a sense. I don't have the nice visuals that Adam has, but in terms of the process, it wasn't that clear. We started looking at tools that were used in each stage of the process. And we had in the back of our minds that having a list of tools used in each stage of the process in itself was not sufficient as a categorizing mechanism. We actually needed categories of tools. But as our process worked, we ended up doing that kind of at the back end. So let me see if I can share my screen. And if I can, I'm going to show you the kind of the working can everyone see my screen?
No,
Hello?
not yet.
Not yet.
Try
Okay, it didn't
again.
work then.
Not yet, mate.
Sorry, that didn't work. All right, let me try now and see if it works. Okay, this should work now. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so this is kind of our working document which emerged, and this is just an example. So you saw there's various stages in this life cycle. So this is plan, and you can see what we did, and this was through a series of groups, some of which were took place virtually, and I think maybe it's important to mention this too, and I think Adam will come in when we talk about stage 3 again. But the initial part of this was quite random in a way. We had the people involved you see today. Helen was involved, Francis was involved, and we had a series of meetings, and each meeting different people would come and contribute, and we'd start to populate each cycle with tools which people thought were relevant to the cycle. And we also had a very productive meeting. I'm sure some of you were involved at in Salzburg in person, where we again continued this work. And so what we came up with at a certain point in the process was for each of the stages, we had a long list of tools, and you can see here in the plan that I've selected as an example, lots of tools were selected. Interestingly, in some stages, there were, I think the top one was like 45 or 50 tools. There were a lot. In other stages, it was much more sparse. There were actually few people could think of fewer tools. With that, we then took, you'll see the red line there, and we have three at the top. We selected 3 categories, or that was actually a different follow-on stage. We then tried to look at the long list of tools and categorize them. So it actually says, this is just a working thing. It says tool name at the top, but you'll see in the case of plan, we came up with 3 categories of tools: data management planning tools, project planning tools, and then combined data management project planning tools. And we only thought of one in that case, which was the data stewardship wizard. And then the next exercise, and by this point, I think we were pretty much down to the people that are on the call today. And we kind of had a sprint at the end where we became much more focused. And it was just a small group of people who were meeting on a weekly basis and trying to actually finalize this deliverable, which proved, I think actually reflecting on our process, it worked out pretty well. In the beginning, we tapped into, I think, quite effectively the collective intelligence and collective knowledge and experience of the community to get a really broad list of possible things to include and things to think about. But then at the end, you really needed to focus down and produce something. And large meetings where people drop in and drop out aren't really conducive to that. So I think the process worked pretty well. So it's just primarily the people that you see today, the 4 of us. And then for each of we had the long list of, so then we had the tool categories, and we had the long list of tools. And then we selected 3 of the tools as representative examples of each of the categories. So I will stop sharing and go back to we can go back to the slides. If I can, here we go. Okay, and yeah, And so this is kind of a conceptualization, if you will, of the process I've just described. And this is actually the important one. So what we have for each stage now in the model, which Adam is now working, as he'll describe in a moment, on coming up with some visualizations. For each stage, we have 3 tool categories. And then for each of the categories, we have 3 example tools. And that's where we were, or that's what we created with deliverable 2. And at that point, since that Adam has been working on the visualization, and I'll now pass you back to Adam, and he will tell you about that.
Thanks very much, Rory. Okay, so one of the key considerations in this project was that we put a lot of work in, as Rory has just described, and I've talked about in the first work package as well. And rather than producing a Google Sheet that we serialize into a report, and also building on some of the affordances like from support from Oracle and so on, we were thinking about how we could take this information and make it both useful and sustainable. So I, at the top of this section, apologize. Some of you may have heard that Honey mentioned I'd been up since 4. I was kind of obsessing about the prototype that I was going to demonstrate not being quite right, and so in the process have, of course, totally broken it. So I will talk about what we've got to, and then I'll hopefully drop a link to the demo at the moment. I've reverted the online back to a very basic prototype that was kind of a demonstrator of the core concepts, and I might do a quick run through that in a minute, but unfortunately I have unjaxed the update. Anyway, so what we wanted to do was present the information as related to the research data lifecycle, to allow people to access it in a way that made sense to them in the context they wanted to use it. So both from the point of view of I am at this particular piece of work, and here I am in my research, what kind of things are available, or in the context of there is a particular tool, and I'd be interested to know what things are either available to feed into this information, or I can do some more processing, some further work along the way. So that means that instead of building an MVP, I want to try and build an MLP, the minimum lovable product. It has key concepts around interaction, ensuring it has curation update and sustainability built in. So if we go on to the next thing, so this is kind of like a general idea of kind of the main affordances built into it. So we have kind of an overall start page, presents some initial information, we've got info and help, and then we've got some different kind of views. So we can view it as kind of like a text, kind of, like a general catalog or list. We can view it according to the underlying schema that's built into it. So that allows us to break the information down into various different facets and contexts. And then we also have graphical interaction views, which means that we can, kind of have this kind of visual context for it. That all sounds great. And the initial prototype shows that, and then the very shiny thing looks really lovely, which again, unfortunately, I am very sorry not to be able to demonstrate today due to ADHD and hyperfocus. Okay, so if we look on to the next thing, right, so that's a general kind of overview of where we were with the schema and the kind of DDL, and that's probably just enough of that slide really. And the next one, there you go. That's the actual page, and the link there is the link to the now reverted, there you go, prototype. So I'll walk you through that. If you can stop sharing for a second, Connie, that'd be great, thanks. Just because it at least allows me to talk about kind of the ideas, and that means that I just for a second need to pull up that are proto. There we go. Right, fabulous. And then I have to share the right screen because that's always hilarious. Here we go. Fabulous. Right, so can people see? There you go, screen sharing. So you'll see here, the first thing is that I talked about how we slightly rejigged that from the initial thing. So if you remember that diagram with the concentric circle, what we have now is fun taken slightly out of that. And these kind of ideas like kind of the mini cycle of collect, process, analyze, store sometimes it's back to analyze, process. Okay, but these are generally kind of the directed graph. Okay, so from here, what we were going to do is you could, click on any of these and get them working. Then you would be able to go into a particular context. Let's say, oh, I want to go into see some more about the things that are in conceptualize, and we have them here. Then we can look at the different kind of facets on the schema. This is then a text view from the schema. This is live, JSON data from the original thing. And then we have like the just text rendering. And again, what we've done is we've taken the information, we've mapped it into a DDL, which I probably have on a different screen, not on those tabs, but I'll grab them in a second. So that's the very initial thing that I used to describe the kind of concept to the group. The new one, apologies, has this kind of dynamic and static thing, so you can navigate across the whole of the lifecycle. If you click on any of those things, it'll then immediately kind of expand to the things that you've seen from the work package 2 that Roy discussed. And then you can also zoom in. So the idea is like from the dynamic, you can either have the whole kind of outline context, or you can have an internal context. And of course, we've got much more information on kind of like text and schema size. So I'll just stop that sharing for a moment. Okay, so I think the only other thing is, yeah. So all of this, as Connie said, is leading towards the finality of the recommendation package. So we will have a report which outlines the work that we've done so far. I think some of the kind of practice and way that we've organized and ways of working, we'll be capturing in there. I think it's going to be really kind of useful for other kind of community efforts in this area. I've noticed that at RDA, we tend to do a lot of these kind of like landscape surveys, and then we produce some information, and then both the way that we kind of preserve and interact with that information and the way that we like provide sustainability and models of that moving forwards can be something of a challenge. So I'm hoping that some of the work and practices that we capture in this will be helpful. Like I said, we were a year-long group, a little bit unusual for WG, but that's the way it is. So we're looking forward to finishing that and finalizing it. So in the next step now, I'm going to stop talking, which I'm going to be very grateful about. We're going to have some Q&A on what we've done so far. And then after that, Rory's going to discuss a bit about the next steps. So thank you very much for your attention. I would really like to hear what you thought.
Thanks, Adam. We have a couple of questions already come in. So we've got one in the chat from Andrew Trelaw from ARDC. Andrew, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Oh my goodness, you mean like a real person?
Yeah, because we've got actually faces on screens now, I see.
Not sure this is necessarily an advantage in my case, but we'll give it a go. And I've just managed to select a camera that I don't have, so let's not do that. So I guess my question is, hi Rory, and hi to people that I haven't yet met. My question is, this is a really nice piece of work, but it looks like it's a snapshot at a point in time. And I mean, Adam has in fact already commented on this. So do you have, noting that working groups have a finite time period, do you have plans to update this? I have a subsequent question, Connie, but I'll wait for whoever asks the other question to have their go before I ask my follow-up. So my initial one is snapshot or ongoing activity.
So I'll take that. So hi Andrew, thanks very much for joining. Good to see you. And that's actually what I'm going to talk about after the Q&A, plans for creating a follow-up working group. So if you don't mind, maybe I'll punt and talk about that in a bit more detail.
And I'll just add to that. Absolutely. And one of the reasons that we are here now and hopefully having this discussion is to try and get some sense of both where we've situated ourselves and the plans going forward that Rory's going to talk about, and also kind of feedback on kind of use cases, utilization that allow us to like shape and interact with that as well. So I'm very conscious that a lot of work gets done, and as you've said before, Andrew, it gets snapshotted, and I think that you know, going I was going to say going forward as well, it's important that we respect the work that's done and allow a more kind of curated resource to exist from them.
Okay, so Connie, my follow-up question that I've already said I was going to leave till later kind of plays off on that. Can I beg the chair's indulgence to ask the follow-up?
Yes, you can.
So the follow-up would be, I really like your visualization work. And yet, sorry, this seems mean and horrible, and I don't mean it to be mean and horrible. It's an instance of what I call, no, maybe I don't have a word for it. It's yet another way of visualizing the same stuff. And part of my concern about how do we keep these mapping exercises up to date is that everybody does their own thing. I mean, I quite like the recognition from the first speaker that, the first thing you do is you set up a Google spreadsheet, because that's exactly what we did in our group, the Global Open Research Commons that Rory was part of. And yet the visualization that you've produced out the end is nice, but probably uses a completely different visualization technique to all of the other mapping techniques or all of the other mapping exercises that have been done. So I guess, and maybe this is something Rory's going to pick up, how do we converge on a single or smaller number of representations so that we can A, visualize them in different ways, and B, keep them up to date more easily?
Okay, well, thanks, Andrew. That actually really helps. I won't in my comments later, I won't have a neat answer to that question, but let's take it as a topic for discussion, if that's okay. I mean, it's an excellent question and a good point, and we definitely need to consider it. So point noted, and let's factor that into the discussion.
Yeah, I think to just immediately push back on that a little bit, the visualization is built on top of a general purpose framework in order that some of those issues that you're highlighting are not so much of a thing. So one of the things that I was looking at, as you've mentioned, GORC is also the characteristics and things of GORC, and also there's the IOI categorization of infrastructure as well. And there's also a question in the chat about kind of looking at that for the point of view of institutions and institutional frameworks, infrastructure, and so on. And there are kind of two approaches to the way that this thing moves forward. One, on the kind of like visualization interaction, is I very much see that as a paradigm rather than an actual thing. So this is an instance of the kind of generalized paradigm. The second thing is that I think we're reaching a point where we've got so much information, so much infrastructure stuff that we need, as you pointed out, to have a couple of better approaches to like generalizing these frameworks and producing these kind of structures and skeletons. And for that, there are already projects like the FAIR mappings and the SOSOM and so on like that. And I think some of the work here needs to be about where we are using these things and how that influences the affordances and proxies that we create.
Thanks, Adam. I just want to hand over if Roxanne, do you want to speak to your question in the chat?
Okay. Well, it's just for me, the RDA meetings are a way to catch up on things because I haven't read the deliverables and so on, but it was just one of those things. Okay, a general visualization with some tools mentioned there. It's very good. We can point researchers to that, but often they come back with questions and so on. So that's why as universities, we pick out some tools and say, okay, we can give additional support there. We do specific hosting like GitLab and so on. So that was my question. How can we put this into an institutional context? And can we take this visualization and make our own branch of it and work on it? I understand from what was just said that this is still something that needs to be thought about and discussed, but that was my main reflection. Because we're all doing our visualizations to make our pages a bit more nice. We don't have to, if we can retake something that works well, that would be nice.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually. And I think that also bears on future work, which we can bring into that discussion. But so, I mean, I think there's there's two things. There's the underlying data, if you will, the spreadsheet of there's the stages, there's the tool categories, and then there's examples of tools. And then that informs the visualization. So Andrew's raising a point, I guess. Part of Andrew's point was about the how effective and how sustainable the visualization itself is. But there's and I think your point also relates to what data goes into the visualization, because visualization, after all, just represents the underlying information that's in the spreadsheet. So one thing is, so I think you're raising an interesting point, is could an institution, how malleable is this? How much can people tailor it? How much should there, in other words, this is not a, obviously it's just a representation. It's not the representation of the life cycle. So so one of the things which we sounds like a great idea to explore in the next working group is how can we let people, how can we facilitate institutions and also increasingly not just universities, but things like research commons and research clouds. How can we facilitate them taking this and then tailoring it to their own needs, making changes, making additions? So that's a great, I think that's a great question, a great idea to explore, because it shouldn't be, it's not the case. No one gave this group or any group the authority to kind of say, you know, we're creating the mapping that's the mapping everybody has to use. Well, you know, that's not right. That's how it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be like that. But nevertheless, to have some starting point, some standard, we think is useful. So anyway, thank you. That's a really interesting point, and I think we should include that as a key point for inclusion in one of the tasks of the next working group that we're hoping to set up.
Thank you, Roxanne. Thanks, Rory. There's another question in the chat from Ming Fang. If you want to unmute Ming Fang, you're welcome to.
Thanks, Connie. I think my question is about the usage of this schema. So I think it's kind of addressed by Roy's discussion with Roxanne. So yeah, lots of work put into this framework and a nice framework. I wonder any consideration who is going to use that. You know, like a repository is supposed to take this schema to classify those tools, and are these schema used for users to find these tools? Then if that's the case, possibly there is another validation loop need be in to verify the schema with those potential users.
Like, do you mind if I'll comment on that and then others can comment. I don't want to dominate the discussion. So yeah, so I think in a way, to some extent, who's going to use this is an open question. It's like anything that's created, it's not the creator's decision about who uses it. It's the users or the market or the community will decide who is going to be useful. So it'd be a bit presumptuous of us perhaps to say who should be who will use it. But I think groups that I think, again, I'll talk about this a bit more. I mean, I think we see this as being very complementary to the new GORC model. And the GORC model is clearly, I think it's already become a standard which people that are developing research commons, be that an institution or be that a country or be that a domain, are actually referring to the GORC model as a standard. And that shows that it has utility. And so the way we've been thinking about it is that this research data lifecycle model can be complementary to the GORC and maybe inform the tools and the development of the tools and services element of the GORC model, and that therefore it would be useful to the same users that are using the GORC model, i.e. People that are developing research commons, be that an institution like K. Leuven, be it a national commons like the one that Norway is proposing, be it Elixir, which is also looking at developing research commons. So my own view is that it's a wholesale construct, and researchers might look at it, but it's actually the responsibility of the research data management intermediaries at whatever level they would be the ones that would make the most use of it. But again, that's a bit perspective. Let's see who finds it useful, I would say.
Thanks, Rory.
I just
yeah.
come in on that as well. So absolutely, there are subsets and further uses, and you've seen in the chat some pointers to like kind of adopters and so on. And I think Rory's key point there about it not being up to us who uses it is exactly on the money. So what we'd really like to see, again, and we'll talk about this in the next steps, is about how both kind of like the work and the practice and the kind of like paradigms for interaction and display and utility actually work with the different kind of users and use cases and so on. So again, this is a kind of like a presentation of the summation of the work that we've done, and points to some ways of interacting and presenting. And then obviously, you know, there's other stuff about curation, this can address later in sustainability. But the kind of the key point there is that this is, you know, very much the kind of like, here are some things which we think are useful from our own particular context. And we'd love like further feedback and ways to develop that.
Thanks, Adam. I think Tom Honeyman's put a comment in the chat. Tom, would you like to speak to your comment?
Sure. Just, I mean, it's the most useless thing to do when a working group goes into wrap-up phase to mention alternate pathways. So I don't want to linger on this one too much, but there is a large body of work looking, so a highly motivated community of people when it comes to identifying software used in research is the people who create that software. Who struggle for that software to be visible. And there is a whole body of work using various techniques to extract mentions of software in academic articles. And then that information is made available in various interesting ways. Some experimental tools like Cite As is a good way to explore mentions of software, or to look for the citation form of software by just searching for terms in there. But the underlying data set is a very interesting and quite lengthy list of tools used in research at various stages. I think what's interesting about their methodology is in addition to extracting mentions of software, they also classify the software in context as performing a certain function with respect to the paper. So was the software, the problem is it's too coarse for what you're trying to do. They were differentiating between software used for a particular aim within a paper versus software that was created or shared as well. So it gave whereas what you would want is for that classification stage to be tuned to the terms in your schema. And you could have a really fruitful interaction there between applying that methodology with the schema that you've developed around the data lifecycle. So just a potential avenue to explore.
Just follow up on that quickly. Thanks, Tom. There's two things to say. Yes, obviously, 12 months ago, great to know, but we are again looking for next steps, and I think this is a really fruitful avenue to move forwards, and maybe even it's more the right time, because I think some of the kind of like human contextual knowledge that went into framing this first piece of work actually then works towards maybe informing some of the interactions with the models and stuff that you've been mentioning. The second thing is that I think from the point of view of even with the stuff that we've done, working on some of the RAG and classifier pipelines that are in this stuff could potentially provide value like for both communities. So even if there's not necessarily too much interaction on the follow-up, I think there's real potential just to look at the way this work is done and the work from Gork as well, and use that in context. I think the final thing I'll say on that is that I'm hoping that some of the work on complex citations and the like software persistent identifier and stuff like will help with this underlying stuff. So as a developer myself, I understand that, it's incredibly frustrating to like have a tool used in a thing and then not be able to track it anywhere, and the kind of like impact and tracking of some of these things will hopefully in the coming couple of years be much better with the development of the infrastructure.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Adam. We are really doing well for time. We are on time, which is great, but there is one more comment that I don't know if one of the chairs wants to address this. So thank you to the participant, by the way, that was taking notes during the presentations, but I did notice there was a comment saying they found 26 research data lifecycle models, only 26 ? So I don't know whether somebody wants to comment on that, but of course we could have gone on for a lot longer on this, but we had to move on at some point, I think is possibly the answer. But if anybody wants to comment, Rory or Adam, feel free.
I think I just echo what you've just said, Connie. I mean, we did a survey of the representative knowledge of the members and a literature review and what we could find. So absolutely, there are many more. We are sure that it's about the balance of putting the time in, and again, I will say that because we have not settled on one individual one, but produced a harmonized schema, what we can do is look at anyone flagging any particular errors or omissions, and we can look at incorporating that. So I think, part of the reason for that first approach of producing something that was harmonized rather than selecting a, kind of best representative candidate allows us to do like these kind of retrospective updates. So we can say this model is very important. It seems to have not made it into the initial Maldrith, but we can issue an update or look at how it works and maybe even just need to build a crosswalk back.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I'm going to share screen, so Rory, you can just present the proposed next steps to the group. and then we can have a discussion on this afterwards.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, I think the discussion we just had is a perfect seg into this next stage of the meeting this morning. So what we're proposing is to create a follow-up working group. And what are some of the things that we've thought that the working group could and should be focusing on? So one thing is to continue developing the model. So actually, we didn't mention this when we were presenting what we did, but actually, one of the things that we originally thought we might include, but in the end, we really didn't have time, was to actually have another. You have the stages, you have the categories of tools, you have the examples of tools, and then to comment on each of the tools with regard to certain characteristics or capabilities. For example, are they closed source or open source? Are they interoperable? And we actually had a little bit of kind of random data on that, but in the end, we didn't have the time to really consider properly whether those were the best or characteristics to be trying to capture, and we certainly didn't have time to go through all of the many tool examples and then say whether or not they met those criteria. So we didn't. That's not included in the initial representation of the model that will be as wrapping up this month. But certainly that's one aspect of continuing to develop the model. A couple of other aspects of continuing to develop the model were already brought up in Tom's and Roxanne's comments. So those are certainly kind of exogenous things which aren't really internal to the model, which could be incorporated into it, which could be considered. So and there are other things as well. So clearly, this is just model version 1.0, if you will. And I think even the discussion this morning reflects the potential for continuing to develop it. So that's one aspect of what we think the new group could be doing. I'll jump to the third: explore sustainability options, which also always comes up, and it came up a little bit tangentially in some of the comments earlier. And there are various aspects of sustainability. I think one relates to Andrew's points about the visualization. How sustainable is it? How usable is it? And then other aspects of the sustainability are you need to continue. One thing about these models, which I'm sure we've all observed, is that people come up with a great model and then it's 5 years later it's completely out of date. So the content of what are the categories, what are the tools, that needs to be continually revisited and worked on as well if this is going to be sustainable. So that's kind of, to me, the substance of the sustainability, if you will. But then there's also the how do you make it sustainable? Is a GORC working group is probably not the ultimate answer to that, because again, at the end of the next working group's life, it again will end. And then what happens? So again, how do we address that issue? So that's a second issue for the group to work on. And I've left I'm going to mention the second bullet point last, because I think there's a fundamental opportunity here, and it also does relate to the questions of who is going to be using this. To me, again, this is just my personal view, but I would make a strong case for it. I think that there's strong synergies and complementarity between this model, especially if we can continue to develop it and make it sustainable, and the work that the GORC group, which is now morphing into multiple groups, as I understand it. So the GORC group or groups as it moves forward. And for those, for those who aren't familiar with the GORC model, there's no time to mention it. But for those who are familiar with it, I think this hopefully will resonate. And we've had discussions with Andrew and CJ in a preliminary way already. One of the things that this group would like to do is to interface and collaborate with the appropriate core group or groups and talk about how there's at least a couple of things. First of all, the details of how does this model that we've come up with, how does it relate to the tools and services element, which is one of the core elements of the GORC model. How can they inform each other? How can kind of at a substantive level, and then perhaps at a more practical or implementational level, thinking again about who is going to be using both of these models. Is there a way in which we can package, or maybe that's not quite the right word, but package or put together the two models in ways which will usefully inform people who want to do things like what Roxanne was describing at the university level, or people that are working on putting together a research commons or a research cloud at the national level, or indeed others who find the one or both of the models useful. So those are some of the things which we think the group could usefully do. We're look forward to people's thoughts on other things as well. And I think if anyone would like to be involved, or please let us know, and you can leave a leave a note in the collaborative notes.
Thanks, Rory. A bit of a premature call to action on the slide, but yeah,
sorry.
this is no. I added it. I added it there anyway, but it's just to ask anybody here who would like to be informed about the upcoming group, or would like to get involved, to please add your name into the notes, because we can then obviously follow up with you after this session. So we're moving on to the general discussion now, and we did have 3 sort of prompts actually on this slide, but I think we can maybe start with referring back to Andrew's questions. If I just stop sharing and go back to the notes. So Andrew's questions were about the snapshot and the sustainability, which was something we wanted to discuss anyway, Rory, I think. And also the harmonization of different mappings, because there are many different mappings out there. So why does this particular mapping make any difference? So maybe that's something we can discuss now. Don't know if anybody wanted to. I mean, Andrew, did Rory answer any of your either of your questions in his proposed next steps?
And are you there, Andrew?
Doesn't seem like it. So I've just put those 3 prompts in the chat
still,
actually now.
Maybe he's still showing. Here he comes. I think, or no?
No.
He must have stepped away, because his computer's still here, even if he's not here himself.
So I am, as part of the discussion, would be interested, given the kind of input that we've had so far, whether or not people think that what we've done is generalizable as it is, or what the kind of next most important thing to do to open it up to the wider kind of use cases and things that people have already mentioned or thinking about. So one of the things that whenever I was looking at the schema and the way I was designing stuff, is again, I've made it pretty much as open and transparent as possible. So I'd be really interested in what people think it needs work on in order to move it beyond what we've done into other people's. And again, some of that we'll probably look at in the follow-up, but if anyone's got thoughts now, it'd be great.
I'll bite.
Thanks, Tom.
I think the limiting factor will always be the hardest thing in this activity, which is that this is a very, very large landscape of tooling. And I think while you've done the intellectual work of pulling together the model and demonstrating how it would map to certain pieces of software, I think there has to be somewhere on the roadmap where you think about what methods one could apply to scale this out. Otherwise, it just becomes a model for its own sake. So I certainly think that to stage that, a next phase would be to identify alternate models that allow you to scale up. Basically, that could be that you need to think about scaling the model down. It might be too elaborate to be applied broadly, or it could be that you accept a certain amount of noise in the way that classification happens, so that there's a chance that the tool is correctly classified according to the schema, rather than that it's been hand curated by a person. Because a really obvious thing is that if it takes a person to evaluate whether a piece of software falls into some part of this larger schema, that's a huge amount of human labor. So I think all of those questions need to be answered, and you could stage your way into it.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think as I've said in response to your first comment, some work on like classifiers and ways of synchronizing the kind of underpinning information model here with some of the other work would be really productive, because you're absolutely right. Completely manual creation of this kind of level of data in order to keep it usable and verifiable is not really there. But at the same time, oversight on kind of models and inspection of kind of the general way things are classified is probably like the right level. So yeah, I think there's a balance probably between inspectability and intervention and kind of classification, and a lot of automation that's been, we can leverage.
Yeah, I might comment on that too. I think it's a good point. At the same time, I think so. I mean, what we've done here is I think it is really important to stress that we really tapped into the collective intelligence of a relevant community. So this wasn't just something which we kind of cooked up without thinking about it. So that actually, it was an intensive exercise, and that exercise can't take place every year probably. I guess I'm skeptical about kind of artificial intelligence solving every problem, and what we've got here, I think, is it is useful, and clearly the fact that the GORC model is already being used, the technical and services elements of the GORC model are already being used, and this is at least complementary, and I think can help usefully inform that, is an indication that it's useful. So how are people going to use this? That's one thing. Well, I think if you look at Roxanne's question about a university, that's exactly what they do. They say, do we need this tool? And the tool they're looking at is not, it's a general tool. I think that's a critical point as well. So one of the criteria for the tools and the categories, they were used by many, many people, not just a tiny community. So they are, generally speaking, they have some generalist capability. If I look at the research clouds and research commons that are also being established, they're going through a very similar process to what the universities do. They're looking for kind of a small critical mass of tools that can get started with. And so they're not looking at the 3 million tools that are out there. And so this is maybe a starting point. I think it's useful. how to sustain that is a question, I think. And to keep it up to date, it clearly needs to be dynamic. It needs to change. So in addition to the kind of automated scaling that I think you're envisioning, I think we need to think about more human revision, ongoing human input at a community level, as opposed to just whoever it is that's going to be maintaining this as an additional scaling function. Yeah, please.
So that sounds totally reasonable to me, Rory. I mean, I think however you slice and dice it, that there are decisions about how to. That is another way of scaling up the task, basically, is to say, well, the purpose is towards this particular end. We're looking at, say, majority use cases for certain tools, and that's a really clear-cut boundary around the intent of the tool. To play RDA bingo, I think there probably does need to be a little bit of gathering of use cases for this as a next step, because that would clearly determine the methodology and the scope of expansion of the tool, or you know, where you would go from here on in. If the scenario you put forward is the scenario that this is being developed for, then I think that's how the work should be directed, for sure. But I got the impression that the use cases work is still outstanding, or it's a possible direction for a next stage.
I think that's a great suggestion, and I know that because I am also involved in the GORC group. I mean, that's one of the things which they're looking at as well. Now that they've got their model, they're looking for, I think they call them implementation use cases, but you know, exactly the same thing. So, yeah.
I'm curious, Connie, I don't know if you can answer this or not, but I'm curious why Oracle picked this one, and whether there were any outcomes that they were seeking in supporting this one.
Yeah, I mean, I can do my best to answer it. So it was kind of a bit of a top-down, bottom-up approach, because of course the RDA is organic and bottom-up in the way the community actually brings the topics to the forefront. So Oracle actually were quite flexible in what they didn't really have anything in mind or any concrete outputs or deliverables. So they just said, you know, they came to us with a couple of ideas. One of them was multi-omics, so as broad as that is, and the other one was sort of looking at different types of research tools, and actually I think more along the lines of creating another kind of inventory or a registry, let's say, of different tools, which is something that we didn't, the community didn't want to do, because it's been done so many times. So they kind of pitched the idea, but actually we had 2 brainstorming workshops in April last year where there were not actually that many members of the group at the time, just the community were interested, and came and sort of bounced around a few ideas, and this evolved over time. So it wasn't really prescribed, let's say, by Oracle, but just more of an idea that has changed and morphed into something completely different, actually, as time's gone on. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it was a meet in the middle, I think. So what would the RDA community like to do to work on mapping digital tools, and this is what has come out of the group.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate, actually, because the Oracle representative, who is a member of the group, Richard Pitts, has actually just had eye surgery and can't attend this meeting, I don't think, today, because he would have, I'm sure, enjoyed this discussion. But I think it's been very useful so far to hear feedback, because I think it's for the first time that we've really been able to showcase what's been happening over the last 12 months. So I've been taking a few notes, but I don't know if anybody else has any more thoughts on this. but it might be a bit of an early finish, I'm thinking.
Can I just comment also on the Oracle? I think we should acknowledge and really thank Oracle. It turned out that Rich is a rich source of information, and he actually participated very actively in the groups, and he contributed a lot. I mean, really useful stuff. That's the first point. And secondly, there was never any hint that he was doing it. It was trying to shape the outcome or the discussion or anything in any way that was beneficial to Oracle. So he just really was one of the star contributors to the output, to the discussion, to everything. Very nice to work with, and as I say, completely kind of taking a community perspective. And without Oracle support, the work wouldn't have gotten done. So to me, it just turned out in a really nice way.
Yeah, thank you. And no, I appreciate your comment in the chat, Tom. No, I'm sure you were just curious about how it all works. I wonder if we can maybe, I don't know if Andrew's back with us or not, but I just wonder whether we could just touch upon his question before, which was that he liked the visualization work, but there are many mappings. So how to harmonize the different mapping exercises, because I do think that's something that this group didn't, or it wasn't within our remit to look at in the very beginning, you know, how it compares with other maps of the research landscape. So, I mean, Andrew, you back? I see you back. So I don't know if you wanted to say anything more about it now we've had some more discussion.
Yeah, sorry, I was here the whole time. I needed to use my phone for something else briefly. So Louise Bezuidenhout and I were having a side conversation in chat about the number of various mapping exercises that we've been involved in over our careers. And we semi-seriously joked that maybe you need an activity to map all the different mapping activities, so kind of like a meta mapping activity. I'm not putting my hands up for this, by the way. I don't think it's a good idea, but I can see why people would suggest it. I suppose the motivation for my question was, how do we avoid wheel reinvention in terms of the underlying representations? And Adam has answered some of that already, I think. And how do we avoid having the same or slightly overlapping groups of people essentially doing the same exercises over and over again? I take Tom's point that the landscape is huge. But the fact that people continue to try and do this, and I've seen a decade's worth of these kinds of activities now, the fact that people continue to try and do it suggests there's a need for it, or there's an itch there that we haven't managed to scratch. I don't want to pursue that particular metaphor too far. There's clearly a need for, behave yourself, Tom, there's clearly a need for this kind of thing. And the fact that we keep redoing it suggests we haven't got it right yet. Now, I liked Roxanne's question about, okay, how do we make this applicable to universities? Maybe another way of thinking about that is, how can we make it applicable to funders? You know, I'm a funder. Someone comes to me and says, I want to build this cool new tool. How do I, as a funder, have a way of saying, no, wait a minute, somebody's already solved that problem. You don't need to solve it again. That might be another possible group of potential users. In the case of the Gork model that Rory's already referenced, thank you, Rory, then for some of the questions that we ask in the Gork, particularly the international model, we could say, okay, you've said you need to solve this particular problem, or you need to have this particular element within your commons. Here's a list of things that you might want to look at. So I think there's certainly potential to take it further. It's a matter of working out how do we do it in a way that leads to convergence of effort rather than divergence and repeated activity. So that was a very long and rambling answer to a simple question, but that's all I've got at this end of the day.
I'll just follow on from that, Andrew, with two quick points. I also have had many years of creating spreadsheets of things and going, we should really, really do something about making this sustainable. And so one of the things that in this final thing was very much about not just that visualization, but the curation as well. You've seen the schema I've just stuck in the chat. It's super, super, super simple because it's just a real core subset of things that we currently know about stuff. And the idea, again, is that keeping stuff tight and simple at the moment means that, you know, we can look at expanding it in various different ways. But the other thing is that I think there's a beginning of work to build this community around people like, you know, looking for the Crosswalks community, the SOSOM and metadata community. But I think, again, there may be the potential for like a little bit of siloing again as people go into the like discipline specific things, right? They go, yes, this is the thing that we need for these particular subset of data. And as someone who works with like the practice and creative community as well, it's one of the things that I was really hoping to keep to the forefront is that it's not, you know, a science life cycle. It's not a one particular thing. It's to think about just research data in all of its various forms. So yeah, I totally agree that what we're looking at is a way to try and form a community around this kind of thing. Maybe part of the follow-up work is to look at bringing some of the other people and efforts in the space together. But maybe the other thing is to think about looking at those past 10 years of spreadsheets and thinking where have they stopped? Where are they all together? And, you know, building some of the characteristics out from them too.
Yeah, so I have a couple of reflections on Andrew's points. The first is that in a way, something becomes sustainable if the market or the community likes it because they take it up. And the efforts that have gone before have been sustainable. They've been sustainable to some extent because there's a community that supports them. They've also been sustainable because they have some funding, some group has some funding which can continue to keep the model, whatever the model is, alive. None of them have really captured the high ground, if you will, and really become kind of a standard. But maybe that's because the time wasn't right, or the model wasn't quite right, or who knows why. But that doesn't mean it won't happen. I'm the kind of incredible upsurge of interest I see in the GORC leads me to believe that the GORC will actually become a standard in a way, the GORC model in a way that other things haven't. So I think that we could be at a turning point. And if that happens, then it will be sustained because there will be funding for it. People are using it. People are evolving it. So that's kind of the big point I would make. In terms of the work that this group has done, yes, I mean, yes, there are more than 26 models of the research data lifecycle. But the problem before, I'm not aware of anyone actually making any effort to systematically look at the models which are out there and then to try to evaluate and harmonize against them. So it's easy enough for everyone to come up with their own model. But now that we've done that work, it will be a little bit harder for people to justify just randomly coming up with a model without at least referencing the harmonization work that's evidenced here. So this is more than just a model. It's a harmonized model which involved detailed study and evaluation and criticism of critical review of other models as well. And then to tie back into the GORC, I really do think that because I do think the GORC is a standard, and I would put my efforts into helping to make it more of a standard. And I think one way in which that can happen and the GORC can be enhanced is by associating the work we've done with the GORC model. So while I think we should be aware of the limitations of what's happened in the past, I think we should also be ambitious and try and think more positively. I'm a positive type person and think, well, how can we make what we're doing not only a fuller model, but a model which is going to capture the high ground. It's going to be sustainable because people find it useful. So I think we need to keep the glasses half full perspective as we move forward, as well as be cognizant of some of the past history and limitations that people have pointed to.
So
Andrew.
Connie, can I respond to that?
Of course.
So I guess 3 comments, Rory. I mean, thank you for your positive words about the Gawk. I guess one of the things that came out of me listening to what you just said then was that in the same way that what we tried to do with the Gawk model was look at existing commons models and abstract them into a common representation. I can't avoid the use of the word common there. You've done the same thing with tools. And I think that's actually really valuable. That as Tom says, the intellectual work you've done to pull out the common threads across those research data life cycles. So first of all, let me applaud your group for having done that and having taken the time to do that. And I do think that there is the potential to build on that. The second comment, responding to Adam, why don't we go back and look at the 10 years of spreadsheets? If only they were just spreadsheets. I'm thinking now of things that people did in RDF, things that people did in a variety of knowledge graph formats. Even the spreadsheets, if you look at the columns, they're different columns, they're different ways of slicing the problem up. It's a non-trivial problem, building on the kind of the legacy base, which is not to say that we shouldn't try and do it, but it's a non-trivial problem. And then I guess my third comment would be around the question of generalizability. I think Adam made a comment about, or maybe it was Rory, I'm sorry, made a comment about, each group is going to want to try and do their own version. There's a real tension, and it's a tension in all of the work that we've been talking about today, between having it really specific and therefore really relevant for a particular community who'll look at it and go, yes, that describes us, all 5 of us, and so general that people will look at it and go, yeah, look, that's so general that it's useless to me. And it's the challenge of finding the Goldilocks thing, the thing in the middle that is sufficiently general that it works across multiple domains, and not so specific that it gets rejected by many of the potential adopters. And I think one of the things we did in the Gawk model, more by luck possibly than by anything else, was finding something that was kind of in that Goldilocks position, not too general, not too specific. And I think the potential for the Muldreth model, I mean, honestly, I don't know which name's worse, Muldreth or Gawk. We can have an argument about that next time we meet in a pub. The Muldreth model feels to me like it's in the right kind of sweet spot, that it's not too specific, not too general. I guess, as Rory says, we'll see if people pick it up and run with it.
Just on the name, I had to call it something, and no one wanted to call it the Adam or AVM model for some reason. So.
Look, honestly, I mean, it works for RSA in encryption, so why not? Go for it.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're almost at time to wrap up now. But I see there's a couple of links also to other sessions that are going on. I don't know if Vashti, I see you've put a link into the Let's Talk About Mappings session. I don't know if you're involved in that and want to raise anything about that.
No, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yes, not involved in that, but it seemed perhaps relevant. I did then look at the details and saw perhaps it's not as relevant as I thought it was. But yes, an indication that, sorry, I don't remember who was saying this, the mapping seemed to, because it's so common, it plays some sort of role, and it's not clear what that specific role is.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So for anybody that is obviously not aware of that session but would like to learn more about it, then you can take a look at the link that Vashti's provided in the chat. So I think on that note, we can maybe wrap up and go and have a break now before the opening plenary sessions. I would just like to thank everybody for your attendance today and for your participation. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been very productive, I think, on behalf of the co-chairs. I think we can all agree that we've got some very useful feedback, and we look forward to the repeat session. If you are interested in keeping up to date with the deliverables, or obviously the follow-up group that could possibly collaborate with GORC, please pop your name in the collaborative notes in the table provided, and one of us will reach out to you to involve you in that work going forward. I am going to just say there are our contact details in the slides as well, if you want to reach out to us or have any further questions. It's the last slide, but thank you everybody, and enjoy the rest of the plenary, and we will see you again soon.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.